The rotors of the MH-60M Black Hawk churned through the pre-dawn darkness above Bagram Airfield, but the aircraft sat motionless on the tarmac. Inside the cockpit, Captain Adrian Ghost Castellanos adjusted her night vision goggles and checked her instruments for the third time in 5 minutes. The mission clock read 3:47 hours. They should have been airborne 23 minutes ago. "Ma'am, we've got a problem." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset from the crew compartment. "The package is refusing to board." Castellanos killed the engines, the sudden silence punctuated only by the settling metal of cooling turbines. She'd flown extraction missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. She'd pulled wounded Rangers from Taliban ambushes and delivered special operations teams behind enemy lines in conditions that would ground most pilots. But in 12 years of service, she'd never had a team refuse her aircraft. The package was SEAL Team 6, 8 of the Navy's most elite operators tasked with a classified direct action mission somewhere in the Hindu Kush. Castellanos didn't need to know the details. Her job was simple: insert the team at grid reference 41 SUB 23,456 78,901, maintain overwatch, and extract them before sunrise. Clean, surgical routine. Except nothing about this felt routine. She climbed out of the cockpit and walked toward the rear of the aircraft where the SEALs stood in a tight cluster near the ramp. Their team leader, a broad-shouldered operator with lieutenant commander's insignia barely visible beneath his tactical vest, looked up as she approached. His cold gray eyes swept over her flight suit, lingering on her captain's bars and pilot wings. "You're our ride?" Lieutenant Commander Hayes asked, his tone carrying the subtle dismissal she'd heard countless times before. "Captain Castellanos, 160th SOAR," she replied evenly. "We're burning moonlight, Commander." Hayes exchanged glances with his team. "No offense, Captain, but this is a hot insertion into enemy territory. My boys need someone with combat experience behind the stick." The other SEALs shifted uncomfortably. Castellanos had heard variations of this conversation before, usually from infantry officers who'd never sat in a cockpit during a firefight, never felt the concussion of RPGs exploding meters from their aircraft, never held a hover while tracers lit up the night around them. She studied Hayes for a moment, nodding the trident on his chest, the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years in the field. A professional who'd earned his skepticism through experience and loss. She could respect that, even as it frustrated her. "What kind of experience are you looking for, Commander?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the cool mountain air between them, loaded with 12 years of proving herself in a world that questioned her presence at every turn. The morning stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the standoff unfolding on the darkened airfield below. Time was slipping away, and somewhere in the mountains, an enemy was waiting. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at her shoulder, his expression carefully neutral. He'd flown with Ghost for 3 years, had seen her thread a Black Hawk through mountain passes in zero visibility, had watched her hold steady while insurgents lit up their landing zone. But these SEALs didn't know any of that. They saw only what stood before them: a compact woman with fierce dark eyes and steady hands, wearing the same uniform as hundreds of other pilots they'd never trusted with their lives. "Commander," Rodriguez said carefully, "Captain Castellanos has over 2,000 flight hours in combat zones. She's pulled more operators out of bad situations than—" Hayes raised a hand, cutting him off. "Sergeant, I'm sure the captain is qualified, but qualification and experience are different things." He turned back to Castellanos. "Ma'am, we need someone who's been downrange, someone who understands what we're walking into." The other SEALs remained silent, but Castellanos could read their body language. They weren't being deliberately disrespectful, they were scared. Elite operators didn't admit fear, but she recognized it in the tension of their shoulders, the way they checked and rechecked their equipment. This mission mattered. Lives hung in the balance, and they needed absolute confidence in every link of the chain. Castellanos unbuttoned the left sleeve of her flight suit and rolled it up slowly, deliberately. The tattoo began just above her wrist, a detailed rendering of a CH-47 Chinook helicopter, rotors spinning, surrounded by 8 names in elegant script. Below the aircraft, coordinates, 34 degrees 32 N, 69 degrees 12 E. Hayes leaned forward, reading the names. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Extortion 17, she said simply. August 6, 2011, I was supposed to be flying that bird. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Every operator in the Special Operations community knew about Extortion 17, the worst loss of life in SEAL Team 6 history. 38 killed when their Chinook was shot down by Taliban forces in the Tangi Valley. I was grounded that night with food poisoning, Castellanos continued, her voice steady despite the weight of the memory. Lieutenant Harrison took my spot, good pilot, better person. She touched one of the names tattooed on her arm. They all were. Hayes studied her face, searching for something. You blame yourself. Every day. The admission came without hesitation. But blame doesn't bring them back. Flying their missions does. Bringing operators home alive does. One of the younger SEALs shifted restlessly. Ma'am, how do we know? Because, Hayes interrupted, never taking his eyes off Castellanos, she's still here, still flying. That takes a different kind of courage. He straightened, decision made. Load up, we're burning moonlight. The transformation was immediate. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and gear as they filed into the Black Hawk's crew compartment. Castellanos returned to the cockpit, running through her pre-flight checks with renewed focus. The weight of their trust settled on her shoulders, heavy but familiar. As the rotors began to turn, she caught Hayes' reflection in her side window. He was looking at her tattoo again, perhaps thinking of his own ghosts, his own reasons for continuing the fight. Rodriguez's voice came through her headset. All passengers secure, ready for departure. Roger that. Castellanos pulled pitch, and the Black Hawk lifted into the darkness. Below them, Bagram fell away, replaced by the jagged silhouette of mountains that had swallowed too many aircraft, too many good people. But tonight would be different. Tonight, she would bring them all home. The flight to the insertion point would take 47 minutes across some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan. Castellanos settled into the rhythm of flight, her hands steady on the controls, her mind focused on the mission ahead. In the crew compartment behind her, 8 of America's most elite warriors prepared for battle, their initial skepticism replaced by something approaching respect. The tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, a permanent reminder of the price of failure, but also of the possibility of redemption. The Hindu Kush mountains rose ahead of them like sleeping giants, their peaks shrouded in clouds that glowed silver in the starlight. This was Indian country, territory where the enemy knew every ridge, every valley, every hiding place, where American helicopters came to die. Castellanos checked her navigation systems and adjusted course slightly to avoid a known surface-to-air missile site. The mission briefing had been sparse on details, but she'd caught enough to understand the stakes. High-value target, time-sensitive intelligence. The kind of operation where failure wasn't just professional disappointment, it was body bags and folded flags. Ghost, this is Overwatch. The radio crackled with the voice of their eye in the sky, an AC-130 gunship orbiting high above their route. You've got clear skies ahead. No activity on the thermal scopes. Copy Overwatch, maintaining course and airspeed. Rodriguez leaned forward from the crew chief's position. Ma'am, the team leader wants to speak with you. Castellanos switched to the internal communication system. Hayes' voice filled her headset, professional but warmer than before. Captain, I owe you an apology. My team and I. We've lost people to pilots who weren't ready for what we do. but Rodriguez filled me in on your record. Kandahar, Helmand Province, the Korangal Valley. You've been downrange. We all have our ghosts, Commander. The trick is not letting them fly the aircraft. A pause. Copy that. For what it's worth, we're honored to have you as our ride tonight. The words carried weight, professional respect earned through shared understanding of loss and duty. Castellanos felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. 15 minutes to insertion, she announced, switching to tactical frequency. The mountains below grew larger, more imposing. Soon they would be flying nap of the earth, skimming ridgelines in complete darkness, relying on night vision and instinct to avoid the peaks that had claimed so many aircraft before them. But for now, in the relative safety of altitude, Castellanos allowed herself a moment to remember why she flew these missions. Not for glory or recognition, but for the simple, profound responsibility of bringing warriors home to their families. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, bearing witness to another chapter in the endless war. Castellanos descended toward the mountains, the Black Hawk's engines muffled by specialized acoustic dampening. At 200 feet above ground level, the aircraft became a whisper in the darkness, nearly invisible to radar and difficult for the human ear to detect. This was what the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment did better than anyone else in the world, inserting America's elite forces where conventional aircraft couldn't go. The GPS coordinates glowed green on her multifunction display, 34 degrees 47 N, 69 degrees 23 E. A narrow valley in the Spingar Mountains, barely wide enough for a helicopter to maneuver. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value Taliban commander was meeting with foreign fighters at a compound nestled against the valley's eastern wall. 2 minutes to insertion, Castellanos announced over the internal comm. Through her night vision goggles, the landscape appeared in ghostly green detail. Jagged ridgelines, steep-sided valleys, and the occasional cluster of mud brick buildings that marked Afghan villages. This was terrain that had defeated armies for centuries, from Alexander the Great to the Soviet Union. Americans had been fighting here for over 2 decades, and the mountains remained as dangerous and unforgiving as ever. Ghost Overwatch. The AC-130's call sign crackled through her headset. Thermal shows cold on your objective. No movement detected around the compound. Copy Overwatch, beginning approach. Castellanos banked left into the valley, the Black Hawk's rotor wash barely disturbing the loose scree on the slopes below. Her co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Webb, monitored the engine parameters and defensive systems while she focused on navigation. Webb was old-school Army aviation, 24 years of flying everything from Hueys in the Balkans to Apache in Iraq. He'd requested assignment to her crew 2 years ago, despite having the seniority to command his own aircraft. "LZ looks good," Webb reported, scanning the proposed landing site through his own night vision. "Flat terrain, good approaches, minimal obstacles." The landing zone was a small clearing, perhaps 50 meters from the target compound, close enough for the SEALs to reach their objective quickly, far enough to avoid immediate detection. Castellanos flared the Black Hawk into a hover, feeling the aircraft respond to her inputs like an extension of her own body. Years of training and combat experience had made the interface between pilot and machine nearly seamless. 30 seconds, she announced. Behind her, she could hear the SEALs conducting final equipment checks. The sound of weapons being charged, night vision devices being activated, and the subtle rustle of tactical gear being adjusted. These were consummate professionals preparing for violence with the same methodical precision other people used to set a dinner table. Hayes' voice came through the comm. "Ghost, we're looking at a 10-minute window once we're on the ground. If things go sideways, we'll need immediate extraction. I'll be overhead. Any sign of trouble, call and I'll be on the ground in 30 seconds. Copy, thanks for the ride, Captain. The Black Hawk settled onto the rocky ground with barely a sound. The SEALs moved like shadows, filing out of the aircraft in perfect silence. Within 15 seconds, they had disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the faint scent of gun oil and determination. Castellanos pulled pitch and climbed back into the night sky, establishing an orbit pattern that would keep her within immediate response distance while remaining invisible to anyone on the ground. The waiting began, always the hardest part of these missions. In the green glow of her night vision, the compound below looked peaceful, almost pastoral. But appearances meant nothing in this war. The radio remained silent as Ghost orbited the valley, her senses tuned to every sound, every vibration that might indicate trouble below. Webb monitored the radios while she flew, both of them veterans of enough operations to know that the quiet moments were often the most dangerous. Ghost, this is Overwatch. I've got heat signatures moving inside the compound. Looks like your passengers found what they're looking for. Castellanos keyed her microphone. Any other movement in the area? Negative, valley appears clear of. Wait. A pause, then urgency crept into the AC-130 pilot's voice. Ghost, I'm showing vehicles approaching from the east. 2 trucks, maybe 3. They're moving fast. Castellanos felt her pulse quicken. ETA to compound. 4 minutes, maybe 5. She switched to the SEAL team frequency. Havoc 6, Ghost, you've got company coming. Multiple vehicles, eastern approach 5 minutes out. Hayes' voice came back immediately, slightly breathless. Copy, Ghost, we're almost done here. Give us 2 more minutes. 2 minutes they might not have. Castellanos could see the headlights now, bouncing along the rough mountain road that led to the valley. If the SEALs were still in the compound when those trucks arrived, the simple snatch-and-grab mission would turn into a firefight. Overwatch, can you take out those vehicles? Negative, Ghost, too close to the village. Civilian structures, possible noncombatants. The rules of engagement were clear. Avoiding civilian casualties took precedence over operational convenience. But that left the SEALs exposed if those trucks contained enemy fighters responding to reports of Americans in the area. Castellanos made a decision that would have surprised her critics. Instead of maintaining her safe orbit, she descended toward the compound, using the terrain to mask her approach from the incoming vehicles. Ghost, what are you doing? Webb asked. Buying them time. She brought the Black Hawk to a hover 50 meters from the compound's main gate, positioning the aircraft between the building and the approaching road. If the trucks contained hostiles, they would have to deal with a fully armed Special Operations helicopter before they could reach the SEALs. The night erupted in muzzle flashes as automatic weapons opened fire from the lead truck. Tracer rounds streaked past the Black Hawk's cockpit, some so close Castellanos could see their phosphorus trails in her peripheral vision. Taking fire, Webb shouted, returning fire with the helicopter's defensive weapons. But Castellanos held her position, using the Black Hawk as a shield, while the SEALs completed their mission inside the compound. The dance with death had begun, and Ghost was leading. Bullets sparked off the Black Hawk's armored fuselage as Castellanos fought to maintain her hover. The enemy had stopped their trucks in a defensive position among the rocks, using the terrain to their advantage while pouring fire into her aircraft. She could hear Webb engaging targets with the door-mounted M240 machine gun, his tracers reaching out through the darkness like angry fireflies. Ghost, were taking hits in the tail rotor, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called from his crew chief position. Still flyable, but we're losing hydraulic pressure. A new voice cut through the radio chatter, Hayes, calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Ghost, Havoc 6, package secured, we're coming out hot. Through her night vision, Castellanos could see the SEALs moving toward the compound's exit, half carrying a hooded figure between them. The high-value target they'd come for was conscious but compliant, probably zip-tied and wondering how his quiet evening had turned into an American Special Operations raid. LZ is hot, Castellanos transmitted. "I'll suppress while you load." She nosed the Black Hawk forward, bringing her chin-mounted 20 cannon to bear on the enemy position. The weapon's distinctive sound, like a giant zipper being pulled, filled the night as she laid down suppressing fire. The psychological effect was immediate. The incoming fire slacked off as the enemy fighters sought cover from the devastating cannon rounds. But the respite was temporary. More muzzle flashes erupted from positions on both sides of the valley as additional enemy fighters joined the engagement. The SEALs were caught in the open, still 30 meters from their extraction point. "Webb, take the controls," Castellanos shouted over the noise of battle. Her co-pilot smoothly assumed control of the aircraft while she focused on the weapons systems. The Black Hawk's sophisticated fire control system allowed her to engage multiple targets simultaneously, but there were too many enemy positions and not enough ammunition to silence them all. "Overwatch, Ghost, we need immediate fire support." "Copy, Ghost, guns inbound." The AC-130's 105 howitzer spoke from the darkness above, its shells impacting among the enemy positions with devastating effect. The massive explosions lit up the valley floor, temporarily blinding anyone using night vision equipment. But Castellanos kept her systems running, trusting her instruments as she continued to provide cover for the extracting SEALs. Hayes and his team reached the Black Hawk's ramp just as a rocket-propelled grenade streaked past the aircraft's nose, missing by mere feet. The warhead detonated against the compound wall behind them, showering the area with concrete fragments and dust. "All aboard," Rodriguez shouted. "Go, go, go." Webb pulled pitch immediately, the Black Hawk clawing for altitude as more enemy fire reached up from the valley floor. But something was wrong. The aircraft felt sluggish, unresponsive to control inputs. "We've lost the tail rotor," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with professional concern. "Pedals aren't responding." Without the tail rotor, the Black Hawk would enter an uncontrollable spin caused by the main rotor's torque. At low altitude, there would be no time to recover. Castellanos took back the controls, using every technique she'd learned in years of emergency training. "Auto-rotation," she announced calmly, beginning the complex procedure that might allow them to survive a powerless landing. The mountains rose around them like the walls of a tomb, indifferent to the drama playing out in their shadows. The Black Hawk fell through the darkness like a wounded bird, its main rotor spinning freely in the thin mountain air. Castellanos fought the controls, using subtle inputs to maintain what little directional control remained without the tail rotor. The technique was called running landing, using forward airspeed to maintain some semblance of control during an emergency descent. "Mayday, Mayday, Ghost is going down," Webb transmitted over the emergency frequency. Grid reference 34 degrees 47 N, 69 degrees 23 E. 8 souls on board. In the crew compartment, the SEALs had secured their prisoner and braced for impact. These were men who'd parachuted into combat zones and fast-roped from helicopters under fire, but there was nothing they could do now except trust in Castellanos' skill and pray to whatever gods watched over warriors in the night. "There," Webb pointed through the windscreen, "small clearing, 2 o'clock. Castellanos saw it. A patch of relatively flat ground perhaps 100 meters long, bordered by boulders and scrub vegetation. Not ideal, but survivable if she could manage the approach correctly. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 800 feet, 700, 600. "Brace for impact," she called over the internal comm. At the last possible moment, she pulled the collective, trading their remaining kinetic energy for lift. The Black Hawk's descent slowed dramatically, but they were still coming down hard. The landing gear struck the rocky ground with bone-jarring force, and the aircraft bounced once before settling at an awkward angle. Silence fell over the valley, broken only by the cooling sounds of overstressed metal and the distant echo of the AC-130's guns, engaging the enemy positions they'd left behind. "Sound off," Hayes commanded immediately. One by one, the SEALs reported in bruised, shaken, but alive. Rodriguez had taken a minor head injury during the crash, but he was functional. Webb was checking the aircraft's systems, though it was clear the Black Hawk would never fly again. Castellanos unbuckled her harness and turned to face her passengers. "Welcome to Afghanistan, gentlemen. Population, us and them." Despite their situation, stranded in enemy territory with a downed aircraft and a high-value prisoner, several of the SEALs actually smiled. There was something about her calm professionalism in the face of disaster that inspired confidence. Hayes activated his satellite radio. "Bagram Control, Havoc 6. Ghost is down, but all personnel are alive. We have the package and need immediate extraction." The response was immediate but not encouraging. "Havoc 6, Bagram. Recovery assets are 6 hours out. Can you maintain your position?" 6 hours. In daylight, their position would be completely exposed to enemy observation and fire. The crashed Black Hawk was like a beacon, drawing every Taliban fighter in the region toward their location. "Negative, Bagram, we need to move." Hayes looked at Castellanos. "Captain, you know this terrain. Where can we go?" Castellanos was already studying her survival maps, comparing the terrain features to what she'd observed during their approach. "There's a ridge line about 2 clicks north. Good defensive position, multiple escape routes, but we'll have to travel light." "What about sensitive equipment?" one of the younger SEALs asked. "We destroy it," Hayes said without hesitation. "Standard protocol." The next few minutes were spent placing thermite charges on the Black Hawk's classified systems, while Castellanos gathered essential survival gear. Her personal weapon, an M4 carbine, felt reassuring in her hands, though she hoped they wouldn't need to use it. As the charges detonated behind them, turning sophisticated avionics into molten slag, the small group began their movement toward the ridgeline. Castellanos found herself naturally falling into the tactical formation, her infantry training from officer candidate school proving more relevant than she'd expected. The tattoo on her arm seemed to throb with each step, reminding her of other crews who hadn't been as fortunate. The climb to the ridge took 2 hours of careful movement through terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and shred equipment. Castellanos carried her share of the load without complaint, earning nods of approval from operators who'd initially questioned her presence. Physical courage was something they understood and respected, regardless of gender or service branch. Hayes had positioned his team in a defensive perimeter along the ridgeline, taking advantage of natural rock formations to create interlocking fields of fire. The high-value prisoner, identified only as Objective Falcon, sat secured but unharmed in the center of their position. Intelligence suggested he possessed critical information about planned attacks against coalition forces, making his capture worth the risks they'd taken. "First light in 3 hours, Webb observed, checking his watch. "They'll spot us once the sun comes up." Castellanos nodded, scanning the approaches to their position through her rifle scope. The valley floor was already showing signs of activity, vehicle lights moving along the roads, probably search teams looking for survivors from the crashed helicopter. Soon, they would expand their search to the surrounding high ground. "Captain," Hayes said quietly, settling beside her observation position, "I want you to know what you did back there, using your bird to shield us during extraction. That took balls. Real operators couldn't have done it better." The admission carried weight coming from a SEAL team leader. These men were legendarily particular about who they trusted with their lives, and earning their respect was not something that happened lightly. "Just doing my job, Commander. Getting you home alive is what I signed up for. Even if it means not getting home yourself." Castellanos considered the question, thinking of the names tattooed on her arm, the crews who'd made that ultimate sacrifice. Especially then. Hayes nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. In the special operations community, there were those who talked about honor and sacrifice, and those who lived it. Recognition of authentic commitment was instant and mutual. "For what it's worth," he continued, "when we get out of this, I'm putting you in for a silver star. What you did tonight saved 8 lives." Before she could respond, Rodriguez's voice cut through the pre-dawn quiet. "Movement in the valley. Looks like they found our crash site." Through her scope, Castellanos could see flashlights and vehicle headlights converging on the area where they'd left the burning Black Hawk. Soon the enemy would realize there were no bodies in the wreckage and expand their search. The hunt would begin in earnest. She settled deeper into her firing position and waited for dawn, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether they all made it home or joined the ghosts that haunted these mountains. The sun rose slowly over the Hindu Kush, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But for the 9 Americans hidden among the rocks, dawn brought only exposure and danger. The morning light that revealed the stunning mountain landscape also revealed their defensive position to anyone with decent optics. "They're coming," Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible over the team's radio network. Through her rifle scope, Castellanos could see the search teams spreading out from the crash site. 3 groups of 4 to 6 fighters each, moving with the kind of tactical discipline that suggested military training rather than simple militia enthusiasm. These weren't farmers with AK-47s. They were experienced fighters who understood small unit tactics. Hayes had positioned his SEALs to take maximum advantage of the terrain, but 8 operators, even elite ones, could only cover so much ground. The enemy had numbers and local knowledge on their side, plus the luxury of time. Coalition aircraft couldn't provide close air support this close to civilian villages, and the nearest friendly forces were hours away. "Overwatch, Ghost." Castellanos keyed her survival radio. "We have approximately 20 enemy personnel moving toward our position. Can you provide any assistance?" The AC-130's response was immediate but frustrating. "Ghost, Overwatch. We're still on station but limited by rules of engagement. Too many civilian structures in the target area." Standard doctrine prioritized avoiding civilian casualties over protecting isolated military personnel, a policy that made strategic sense but felt less reasonable when you were the one hiding in the rocks waiting for enemy fighters to climb up and kill you. "Movement 2 o'clock, one of the SEALs reported. "Single fighter, maybe a scout." Castellanos shifted her scope to the indicated direction and found the target, a bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing, carrying what appeared to be a radio along with his assault rifle. He was moving carefully up the slope, staying behind cover but clearly searching for signs of the Americans he knew had to be somewhere in the area. "I can take him," the SEAL whispered. "Negative," Hayes responded immediately. "Gunshot will give away our position to every fighter in the valley. We wait." The next hour passed with agonizing slowness as the enemy search teams methodically worked their way up the mountainside. Castellanos found herself thinking about the families these men would leave behind if the situation deteriorated into a firefight. Not the enemy fighters. She'd made peace with the necessity of combat long ago, but the Americans hidden among the rocks. Hayes had a wife and twin daughters in Virginia Beach. Webb's son was graduating from high school next month. Each of the SEALs carried photos and personal effects that told stories of lives beyond the war. Her own family was smaller but no less important. Parents in San Antonio who still worried every time she deployed. A sister who sent care packages filled with her favorite coffee and books she'd never have time to read. Simple connections that made the abstract concept of home into something worth fighting for. "Ghost Bagram Control." The radio crackled with an encrypted transmission. "QRF is airborne. 2 hours to your position." 2 hours. The Quick Reaction Force would consist of additional special operations personnel with dedicated air support, enough firepower to extract them from almost any situation. But first, they had to survive the next 2 hours, and the enemy was getting closer with each passing minute. The scout they'd spotted earlier had been joined by 3 more fighters, all of them now less than 200 meters from the American position. It would only be a matter of time before one of them spotted something. A reflection from a rifle scope, the wrong shade of green from someone's equipment, any of a dozen small details that could give them away. Castellanos adjusted her grip on her M4 and settled deeper into her firing position. The morning sun was climbing higher, and soon the heat would make their rocky shelter nearly unbearable. But discomfort was irrelevant now. Survival was the only thing that mattered. The enemy fighters spread out as they climbed, using tactical movement that spoke of professional military training. Castellanos recognized the formation, a standard patrol base advance that would systematically clear every possible hiding place on the ridgeline. These men knew their business, and they were hunting Americans with the patience of predators who understood their prey was trapped. "Stand by," Hayes whispered over the radio network. "If this goes kinetic, we fight through to the alternate extraction point. Captain, you stay with the prisoner and the radio. We'll need you to coordinate with the QRF." The role assignment made tactical sense. She was the only one with direct communication links to the recovery aircraft. But it also felt like protection, keeping the female pilot away from the sharp end of the fighting. Part of her resented the implication, but the professional part of her mind recognized sound tactical thinking. "Copy," she responded simply. The lead enemy fighter was now close enough that she could see the details of his equipment through her scope. Soviet-era web gear, a modified AK-74 with modern optics, and the kind of tactical radio that suggested these men were part of a larger, well-equipped organization. This wasn't a random search party. It was a professional military unit conducting a deliberate operation. "Contact," Rodriguez whispered urgently. "They've found our trail." Through her scope, Castellanos could see one of the fighters crouched beside a series of boot prints in the loose soil, tracks that led directly toward their defensive position. The man was speaking rapidly into his radio, probably calling for reinforcements. The hunt was over, now came the killing. Hayes' voice carried grim resignation. "All stations, weapons free. Engage on my command." 8 rifle scopes tracked 8 different targets as the Americans prepared to announce their presence in the most violent way possible. The morning stillness was about to be shattered by gunfire, and the peaceful mountain landscape would become a battlefield. In the distance, more vehicles were approaching along the valley road. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether they were coming to collect prisoners or bodies. The first shot came from Hayes' position, a single, precisely placed round that dropped the enemy scout before he could transmit their location. The sound echoed off the surrounding peaks like a starter's pistol, and suddenly the entire ridgeline erupted in gunfire. Castellanos watched through her scope as the SEALs engaged their targets with the methodical precision that made them legendary. Each shot was carefully aimed, each target prioritized by threat level and tactical importance. Within 30 seconds, 6 enemy fighters were down, and the remaining search teams were scrambling for cover. But the initial success was temporary. The sound of gunfire would draw every hostile within miles, and radio chatter in the valley below indicated that reinforcements were already moving toward their position. The brief engagement had bought them time, but at the cost of revealing their exact location. "Ghost, Overwatch." The AC-130's call came through her survival radio. "We can see muzzle flashes from your position. Multiple enemy vehicles approaching from the southeast. Request immediate guidance." Castellanos keyed her microphone while continuing to scan for targets. "Overwatch, Ghost. We need fire support on the vehicle convoy. Danger close." Copy Ghost, guns inbound. The massive shells from the orbiting gunship began impacting among the approaching vehicles, turning trucks into twisted metal and sending surviving fighters scrambling for whatever cover they could find. But more enemies were approaching from other directions, and the AC-130 couldn't engage them all without risking civilian casualties in the nearby villages. Captain, Webb called from his position. "We've got movement on the north slope. Looks like they're trying to flank us." Castellanos shifted her fire to support the SEALs engaging the new threat, her M4 barking steadily as she picked off targets moving among the rocks. Her marksmanship training was paying dividends. Each round found its mark, contributing to the wall of accurate fire that was keeping the enemy at bay. But ammunition was finite, and the enemy seemed to have an endless supply of fighters willing to take casualties to reach the Americans. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and the QRF was still over an hour away. "Bagram Control, Ghost," she transmitted between engagements. "We need immediate extraction. Current position is not sustainable." Copy Ghost. QRF Commander is requesting you move to alternate extraction point Alpha. Coordinates follow. The alternate extraction point was 3 kilometers away, across terrain that would require them to break contact with a numerically superior enemy force. Under normal circumstances, it would be nearly impossible. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the men around her weren't normal soldiers. Hayes was already coordinating the withdrawal, his voice calm despite the chaos of battle. "Overwatch, we need suppression fire on all approaches. We're moving to extraction point Alpha." Copy Havoc 6, guns rolling in hot. The AC-130's firepower bought them the few minutes they needed to begin their movement. One by one, the